A resurrected berserker. Here's your look at the Hasbro Marvel Legends House of X Wolverine. With adamantium claws unleashed, Logan is prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice in the fight for freedom for all mutants. Before we get a closer look at Wolverine, the first thing we're going to want to do is figure out how tall the figure stands. This now marks the final figure of this wave, so if everybody has been enjoying themselves, thank you for coming back and watching all these videos. Technically, yeah, Wolverine isn't really part of the wave in the sense that you need to buy him in order to complete Tri-Sentinel, and yet it was one of the most looked forward to figures, I feel, about this entire wave. I'm going to get into more of that in a second. First thing, obviously, we're going to do is figure out how tall the figure stands, taking it to the very top of his head. He is going to be a little bit shorter than some of the others. Wolverine stands very small at 5.6 inches in height. We can switch that to centimeters, revealing that the figure of Wolverine is 14.2 centimeters tall. Getting going with some size comparisons, we can bring in the Magneto that we just finished having a look at not too long ago. We can also bring in Marvel Girl. Little tiny feet on Marvel Girl. I mean, it seems to be a continued trend. There's always something wrong with the feet on these figures. There is Cyclops, speaking of tiny little feet. And speaking of large feet, here's Professor Charles Xavier. Terrible figure. But it gives you a good idea just how small. Actually, you know what? Let's move him over here. Don't want to take the spotlight away from Wolverine. Just again to give you guys a good idea of how much smaller Wolverine is with some of the other figures that we already had a look at. Sadly, Wolverine comes up a little short in the way of accessories. I had to throw that in there because he's still a pretty strong guy. He doesn't come with much in the way of accessories other than just a one swappable head sculpt. He is, after all, part of this wave, but not really part of this wave in the sense that he comes with anything needed to build Tri-Sentinel, which, by the way, in case you are curious, an update on Tri-Sentinel. The heads are in place. We're ready to go. Producer Tony's got everything stocked, ready to go for the next review. We will be looking at Tri-Sentinel in the upcoming video. But in the meantime, like I said, Wolverine doesn't come with much in the way of accessories. Short of the fact that he does, oh, there is another short joke. Short of the fact he does come with a swappable head sculpt, which depicts the resurrected Old Man Logan. You can see right there, the additional beard done in gray. I'll swap this one out for a second, but I just want to give you a quick kind of early peek at what it looks like. It's a good looking head sculpt, I have to admit. Probably not going to be the way that's going to permanently stay on the shoulders of this particular figure on this particular figure collector's shelf. But I do appreciate the fact that we get a figure like this because, again, this is, if you are a fan of the Power of 10, House of X, this is probably a little bit more closer to proximity than probably what you're used to seeing for Wolverine, at least for this particular story. So we're going to put that down for the time being. We'll go back to that. We'll go back to that in a second. Before we do that, I want to actually pick up the figure of Wolverine and get a good close look at him first and foremost before we start swapping out things. Now, personally speaking, even though I was a big fan of the story, I will say that I am actually a bigger fan of this look of Wolverine, because I feel like this could easily just be a Wolverine that you put on the shelf if you just want a Wolverine figure. Personally speaking as well, if I can also throw that out there, I've always been a bigger fan of the yellow and brown costume instead of the yellow and blue costume. Just a personal preference of mine, because in the 90s when I was really getting into X-Men comics, I was in junior high and early high school. This is kind of like the more costume I recognize and kind of relate more so to. Not that I was necessarily wearing this costume at school. That would be ridiculous. But getting a closer look at Wolverine's head sculpt. While it is good, I will admit there's a lot of paint problems with it. You can probably see a lot of the bleed happening here, where unfortunately the side of his brown pointed ears, as you can see, has bled a bit onto the face. Or you could use the opposing argument that the flesh tone paint hasn't been completely painted over. So it kind of has, well, it's messy everywhere, unfortunately. Right underneath his nose as well. You can see the little strip of yellow going up from the middle of his nose, carrying over to the top of his head. At least it connects. Although it does look like one is plastic and one looks like it's painted clearly. I do appreciate the fact that they gave him like a pearlesque sort of colored of eyes, but in some sense, it actually kind of gives him dead eyes too. I guess they probably could have made those eyes just a slight bit whiter, but I do appreciate the fact he does have a nice smile on his face. He's in on a joke that you're not aware of just yet. You will know soon enough, though. Really nice looking head sculpt, though, on Wolverine. Teeth are actually pretty clean as well. The nice white paint done onto the teeth hasn't bled onto anything else. Really, the biggest culprit right now is just the mask. As you can see, the mask is really the biggest problem with the head sculpt on this particular figure. Really, in comparison, if you really bring in the other one, the Old Man Logan, I was going to say Hogan. Old Man Logan, you can see the alternate head sculpt, actually does a better job of being a little bit cleaner in paint, which is a bit of a shame because this is the head sculpt I would have ultimately gone with. Still will go with it. You can see the difference between the two head sculpts. I'm going to again pop this off to replace it with this in a moment. As for the rest of the body, he is a generally short figure simply just because of the build of the character in the comics. He's always been a really short character. So Hugh Jackman really playing him in the movies really never really made sense in the first place. I hope with Disney now running things and with X-Men eventually coming into the Marvel universe, cinematic universe, I hope eventually we will get ourselves a more shorter, squatter looking Wolverine. That doesn't have to necessarily be the star of the show. That being said, I do like the costume coloring, again, going back to the idea of liking the brown and the yellow. He's a very stock build character. The paint is pretty good. Like even like the side yellow, for example, it reads very much like it's plastic. I know that's a really strange thing to be saying it, but it's got a sheen to it that you don't really see on the top here. And I kind of wish it was a little bit more consistent. That's a very small gripe, very, very tiny little gripe. Got to stop talking about tiny little things. Looking at the gloves, though, you can see with Wolverine, I thought these would be the gloves that you can remove the blades. Then trying to do it myself, realizing halfway through pulling this that you can't seem to remove these. So I would just leave them as is. They're softer plastic. They're all done in a nice gunmetal gray. He doesn't have any other swappable hands. Like I said, other than just the swappable head sculpt, that's the only thing that comes included with this particular Wolverine. The paint is pretty good on the belt. You can see the X logo done there. I like the way that the molded plastic resembles almost that of leather. You can see kind of like the little cracks in the leather kind of thing and the texturing that you would expect to find with that. The gloves are decently done as well. Kind of looks like it's got straps in the gloves also. And then you get a little bit lower down. Yeah, yellow. Yellow always tends to be a big problem when it comes to figures. It could have been a lot worse, I suppose. But you can definitely see, like, there's not really a strong line where one color stops and the next color begins. It looks to be the case that they probably have used brown plastic and then painted the yellow over top of it. But the yellow, it's a little on the messier side. It looks clean enough from the front, other than maybe this one little area on the thigh. It almost comes across a little bit as well, that on this side of the leg, it goes a little bit lower than on this side right here. I think it may just be my eyes playing tricks on me. But yellow's always been a big problem, and unfortunately Wolverine here not only gets the problem in the yellow, but he also, like I said, gets the problem in his face sculpt as well. And then, of course, if we get a little bit lower down, he's got boots very similar to that of his gloves. Again, looking like they're molded in plastic. The feet are small, but they're proportionately small for the rest of his body. If anything, I probably would say that the head sculpt seems like it's a little too big. I mean, when you compare it to the shoulders. But if you do like the rule of thumb of heads on either side, I guess technically the head's appropriate size. It just could be the fact that proportionally you're used to so much seeing a longer, taller figure that this head sculpt looks a little off proportion just by the base of the body. But again, I think it's appropriate. You got the little hairs on the arms, typical trademark of Wolverine on both sides right there. I don't know what it is about this plastic here. I don't want to get too far off the beaten path here, but the plastic of the bicep doesn't quite seem to gel with the coloring of the forearm here. It almost seems like one is painted, one is plastic. That's a bit of a shame. But let's go ahead and pop the head sculpt off one last time, get a good gander at it. FYI, my favorite of the two. Let's go ahead and pop this off. Oh, that's such a satisfying sound. And we'll go ahead and replace it with the Old Man Logan Resurrected Wolverine. We'll go ahead and just pop the head in place. Now, this one is a little bit more difficult. I have told you in the past, it's easier if you just bring the ball joint to the back. Let's do that. There we go. All right. Mission accomplished. I will say to the credit, I mean, that's a good looking head sculpt. I would even say, and I know it has to be specific to this storyline, but really if the chin beard hair was gone, that alone would be just a great looking Wolverine head sculpt. You got the seam lines there running across the top of the temple of the cowl, stretching all the way around to the back. Very nice. I did see some imperfections when it came to this area of the plastic, and yet generally mine remains somewhat unscathed. One last thing I'll mention though is, again, like colors don't always gel when it comes to these figures. You can kind of really also see it here with the shoulders. The shoulders aren't quite the same brown as the rest of his torso. It's pretty close. It's pretty close, but it's not quite there. And then one last time, just because I don't know why, just for some reason, just bringing in the last head sculpt that we looked at. Always nice to have options. Always nice to have options. Looking at the articulation here on Wolverine, his head rotates all the way around. Now that we've swapped this head sculpt out, the head goes up, the head goes down, and you can also rock it back and forth this way. The ears are a slightly softer plastic, not to the point where I feel like it's going to warp, but it is a little bit more softer than the rest of the figure. He does have the shoulder crunches, so you can bring those arms, if he's kind of pouting and wants to sit in the corner, you can do that. Or you can also bring those arms back as well for a good full effect of having the arms extended out like that. Like that, kind of bend the arms with the elbows and have the blades kind of ready to do some serious damage. The arms do rotate all the way around as well. He has a swivel at the bicep. He has a double hinge on the elbow. You can't really quite pull off a double hinge, honestly, though, because unfortunately just the size of his bicep, that has to be a problem with a lot of people with just big, giant biceps. You just can't quite bend the elbow at a double bend like that. It's just a shame, really, that the flesh tone isn't quite the same color as the rest of the bicep. But the hand does rotate all the way around. You can also hinge it back and forth. Just be careful of the blades. That's all I ask. He has an upper torso crunch. Back, forward. And you can also rotate the waist all the way around. What they've actually done, though, is they've put the belt as a separate piece. I know sometimes I'm not too keen on the idea of doing that because the belt just ends up flopping around when you are rotating the figure. I mean, they've sort of put it in place anyways that when you are rotating the figure, the belt just generally likes to move around on you, and you may find yourself then just having to readjust it once you get the figure in the place that you want it. The legs split out. That's to the extent of what you can actually pull off with the legs. They go forward and back. A swivel about 3/4 of the way up the thigh. Of course, it's going to break up the paint. There's no way around that. Double hinge on the knee. He has no articulation in the lower boot because essentially this is just all molded sculpt. This to this is all the same. And the feet, of course, go back and forth this way, and you can also rock it back and forth this way as well. Nice looking Wolverine. Nice looking Wolverine. Let's get him in a somewhat non-generic pose. There we go. Good looking figure, though, I will say. He stands pretty good as well, because, of course, he's a lower to the ground. That really, seriously, wasn't a small joke. He's a little bit closer to the ground, and because of the size of his feet, he generally stands a lot better than some of the other figures that we had a look at in this wave. Though my favorite, I think, of the two head sculpts is still probably going to be this one right here. Either way, whatever head you decide to go with, it's a good-looking Wolverine specific to this comic run. Or if you default it just to the smiling Wolverine, it's technically a Wolverine that could fit in with any part of your Marvel Legends collection. The only thing that really wrongs Wolverine here is poor paint application. And it's not even to the point where it ruins the figure either, but it's things you obviously note. And the things you notice on a figure, especially yellow. Yellow is always a problem when it comes to applying it to figures because a lot of times yellow never looks finished on the edge of it. You don't get that nice stark line where the yellow stops and then you continue the rest of the color of the figure. It always generally looks a little unfinished or splotchy. And Wolverine also has that same problem. But the rest of the figure, both the sculpting of the body, nice short squat, that's the way Wolverine should look. Not to mention you get two different swappable heads. So if you want one a little bit more akin to the House of X, or Power of 10, this is a great Wolverine because you got the little chin beard, you got that old man Logan thing going on there. But if you do want to swap that out, pop that out with the swappable head sculpt that just has the regular smiling Wolverine. Bingo bango, you got yourself a perfect looking Wolverine to put on your shelf, providing you like the traditional brown and yellow costume. Not, of course, the original costume that he had in the comics, but one of my personal favorites. I've always dug these designs, this particular color palette for Wolverine, and it works really well on this particular mold of him. I don't know if the head sculpts are unique to this particular figure. I don't recall having a smiling Wolverine as part of a Marvel Legends figure release in the past. I may be incorrect by that, but I'm really digging that smiling Wolverine, even though technically we're not using that here in Final Looks. Great options available. Not necessarily a case where you have to buy this figure to complete the Tri-Sentinel, and yet I feel it's the figure I would recommend the most of all the ones that we've looked at. All the figures have had pros and cons. Some of the figures have had more cons than pros. But Wolverine is definitely a figure, if you're a big fan of Wolverine, that I would recommend you picking up and adding to your collection. What do you guys think of the Wolverine? Let me know down below in the comments section. And as I did state earlier into this review, Tri-Sentinel is finished and ready to go, and we will be having a look at the Tri-Sentinel in the upcoming video. The key, though, is to making sure you're not missing out on anything that's going up onto this channel. As a friendly bulletin board reminder, I can tell you that Monday to Friday, 12 p.m., 2 p.m., and sometimes even 4 p.m., we have new videos popping up on that channel, on this channel. Unheard of, you would say. How could you put so many videos up? I ask myself that very same question on a regular basis. But make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Make sure you turn on the bell notification. And yeah, make sure you're coming back to this channel and checking on it periodically. Just in case you aren't getting all those friendly reminders, come back to the channel regularly and just see if there's anything that you may have missed out on. I will tell you right in advance that we will be looking at, yes, the Tri-Sentinel, and there's going to be a whole ton of videos coming up after that. So always, always, always keep your peepers peeled. And as always, guys, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys next time.